I got a message from Snoop Dogg's agent to say he's in London and he wants to meet. So we went to his hotel room. He was talking about how Peaky reminded him of how he got involved in gang culture in Detroit and South Central. I mean, it was brilliant. He's such a great bloke and he's so articulate and funny and everything. And it was wonderful. And then about 2 years later, A$AP Rocky was in touch. And I honestly didn't know who he was. And I said something to one of my kids and they said, "What? You gotta meet him." And so I invited him to, like, we had a Christmas dinner for the kids. And again, he was saying, like, in Harlem, people connect with it.
The minute that Tommy puts the hat back on, the cheers that happened in that theater were wild, like from grown men in the aisles.
Great.
Some of them were nude. It was very strange. But what was it like for you being able to put that kit back on?
Well, it was interesting in storytelling terms again, like how long do you hold that back for? And so we experimented with that all the way through. I mean, Steve had written it, that it happened, a third of the way into the film or something like that. But, there was a sort of a experimentation about, like, because when he's rambling around in the house, it's not the Tommy we're used to. He's not in the full costume. So it's like drawing back the bow, and how long do you keep it taut before you let it go, And so we experimented with that in the edit, but when we felt like that was the point, and then when you let it off, the audience loved it. Yeah.
Even I was cheering for you, and you were coming to get me. I was like, yeah, oh shit, he's actually coming. No, but that was such a moment. I agree, and that was it was just perfectly where it should be, and that fucking shot, and that walk, man, is forever.
It's iconic.
Yeah.
Even, for you, the minute that you turned around as Duke, it was like, oh, yes, this is perfect. This makes perfect sense.
He's got the walk.
You've got the walk.
I walk like that, so I'm going on my neck. Man.
I'm in charge now.
At what point did you decide that this film needed to happen?
I always wanted to finish this part of the Peaky story with a film in the Second World War, and somebody showed me a clip of me at the end of doing publicity at the end of series 1. And it was like a little series on BBC Two, very confidently saying, "I'm going to end this Second World War and it's going to be a movie." Like, how do you know? It's like ridiculous. And here we are. So I always wanted to do that. And I wanted it to be a story of a man and a family between two wars. So it starts at the end of the First World War and ends at the start of the Second World War.
What was it like seeing the film in Birmingham?
Oh man, it's just so great, and people, very emotional, people love it, and making Peaky popular there was the biggest challenge, because Birmingham's a sort of city, I don't know what the equivalent would be in America, but it's a big industrial, tough town.
Like Detroit.
Yeah, and it's sort of place where people are first think, oh come on, that's not us, don't be ridiculous, But they've taken it to their hearts, and it's been great. And I've got a studio up there now, and we got these I got someone to do these big murals of the characters, and there's a lot of them around town now, and they never get touched. They never get tagged or sprayed across or anything. No one goes near them. And that for me is the biggest thing about it, how it is in Birmingham. They leave it alone.
They honor those characters too much.
Yeah.
And your family's from there.
Yeah, I'm from there as well. My parents were brought up in Small Heath, born in the early 20s. And the reason I did Peaky is because of the stories that they told me about when they were kids. My mum, they're born in quite a tough place, and my mum, when she was 9 years old, was a bookies runner, because it was illegal. Off-track booking was illegal. So she'd be 9 years old walking down the street with a basket of washing, and people would walk in the other direction with the name of the horse, their code name, written on a piece of paper, and they'd wrap their bet and they'd drop it in as they walked past, because the police were everywhere. And she'd get to the bookie's place, Tucker Wright his name was, and there was a dog on a chain that was just long enough that a kid could get round, go in, and there's this great big fat bloke who was Tucker Wright, and she'd hand him a basket of washing and he'd give her sixpence. And my dad's uncles were bookmakers who were known as the Peaky Blinders. So the stories of what it was like in those days. When I was a kid, they told me it was like the Wild West. I just thought, this is amazing. And I always wanted to tell that story.
In the first shot, and the song, Red Right Hand, I remember like watching it for the first time and turning to my friend and being like, this is like the coolest show on television. Because it's from the music to the cinematography to the acting to the writing, it's so cool. And I mean, I can't imagine that someone from Birmingham would look at that and be like, oh no, yeah, that's us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I thought that it's going to go either way. People in Birmingham would be quite capable of going, no, that's not. But no, they went for it, which is great. But and then, obviously, not just them, everybody went for it. And the way it became popular around the world was just astonishing to me. It was incremental, but bit by bit. People would come back from holiday, first of all in Spain, and they say, there's a bar in Spain called the Peaky Blinders. And then people would go on trips to like Buenos Aires and Johannesburg, and they'd say, there's a Tommy Shelby bar. I think, what? And then I was in was it the other day? I was reading a great story from someone in, I think it was South America or somewhere, and they were saying that they were talking to a relative there, and they were saying, we love it because they're acting like we act. They're doing what we do. It's all about family and all of that and the emotion stuff. It's like, it isn't just that the individual tries to, like Tommy Shelby doesn't try to go on his own. He wants to take his family with him, and it's a collective ambition to all go, and there's no condition to it. There's no acceptance of this is the only way you can get there. You do it any way you can. And then, I mean, there's a line in one of the shows where Tommy says, they're worse than us. Up there, they're worse than us. And so, they sort of give themselves permission to do what they do. But there is a code and there is a system that they do abide by.
Yeah, absolutely. Eventually, Tommy Shelby, who wants to be accepted, eventually lets that go.
Yeah.
Is that when he sort of realizes that they're worse?
Yeah, there's a point where he realizes, and I think what I wanted to do through the story was he begins with, I'm going to help my family. And then a point is reached where he realizes that the people around him, in his community, if you like, though he would never use that word, but the people that are like him, he wants to help them as well. When he gets into politics, to begin with, it's purely cynical. He just wants to get, influence. But eventually he means it, and he does want to do the right thing for the people around him. And that's when it becomes, he doesn't want to be accepted, he wants to change things.
You were talking about how like Snoop and A$AP Rocky, and like they were talking about how the communities that they grew up in, they connected, and that there's this in the Netflix Peaky Blinders podcast. I forget who was talking about this, but the idea that Peaky Blinders and like the Billy Boys were actually copying what they were seeing in the movies, how the Hollywood gangsters were dressed, and then they dressed that way, and that to me it signaled this idea that like how much Hollywood and how much television and film can influence a community, can influence people, can influence history. Does that factor into when you write, into the stories that you write? Are there sort of ideas or things you want to influence?
But do I want to influence it? Well, I mean, I don't set out to think, okay, I want to do this in order that it will have this effect. And because I do write in such a non sort of schemed or logical way, then that would be difficult anyway. But afterwards, when I'm looking at the stuff, what I'm hoping is that it will have an effect. I mean, with Peaky, it would be that what I've tried to do is tell working class stories, but with absolute, not even just respect, with from that point of view. In other words, the emotions are the legitimate emotions. They're just as powerful and just as valid and noble or ignoble as any other group of people who may have the same emotions, and hope that other people writing might write. It's a funny thing, America and Britain are very different, because in America you're very good at mythologizing common people. Like I'm thinking Westerns, cowboys. Cowboys were people who worked with cattle.
Yeah.
They probably weren't very well paid. They came from all over the place, and they were very working class people. But the Americans have had no problem with turning that into a chivalry and into a mythology. And quite right, because it's a beautiful thing. Americans will take the name of one of their cities, like Galveston or Chicago or New York, and turn it into a song. In Britain, we have a problem with that. You know, Huddersfield, we can't write a song about, or Birmingham, we can't write a song about Birmingham. When I first started doing Peaky, one of the things I decided was that the mythology, my mum and dad were kids when they witnessed it, and then I was a kid when they told me, to not lose the mythology, to not make it like some gritty urban cautionary tale. This is the Wild West, you know. This is absolutely taking some real events and some remembered events and some fictional events and turning it into a cautionary tale or a fairy tale, a fable, and do that. Just heighten it, just lift it off the ground just enough to make it work in that way.
In hearing you talk about the stories that you were told as a kid, that like there is a way that a child can view their environment in this larger than life, almost like mythological way, that I feel like I want to take that into my own writing. I feel like that is part of, like, I don't know, like a formula that works. You know, that like it allows you to sort of see things, like you're saying, like rise it up just a little bit. It's
sort of like, it's almost like a kind of naivety or innocence in a way, where you're not legislating for people laughing at it. You know, you're saying, you know, the pub, the Garrison, which is in the story, is like a big cathedral. It was a real place. I've been in there many times. My granddad used to go in there and play the piano for free beer, and it was just a rough old pub, you know. But when my mum and dad were kids and they sat outside, it was a cathedral. And then when they told me, and it was the mythological version of that thing. And so just keeping that confidence is the thing. It's being confident enough to say, yeah, that's what it is. This is what it is. And I think if you do it with enough conviction, you sort of push through the resistance. I mean, when Peaky first came out, that people didn't quite know what to make of it in Britain, because everybody's got their view of what Birmingham is. They've got their view of what people of that era were. You know, our view of the 20s, it's like it was very tough and people were very oppressed and the working class were on hunger marches and stuff like that. And here were these people that were immaculately dressed who really believe in themselves, which is actually also true. And that's the thing. I think the myth often is true.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of myths and, you know, larger than life characters, I mean, Bond. Yeah, I mean, is that something that you ever had on your bingo card?
Oh yeah. I always wanted it. Yeah, I didn't think I'd get it, but yeah, it's. I can't talk about it at all in any detail,
sure.
but
I mean,
it's wonderful. Yeah. It's a wonderful thing to get to do.
Yeah, I mean, you and Denis, like that's like, if there was ever a duo to bring Bond back to the screen, I could be more excited about you.
Good, same here. Same.
I'm also interested to go way back. Something that I was not aware of until I was doing research for this is that you were one of the creators of Millionaire.
Yeah.
Like, how did that come about?
When I wrote 30 Pretty Things, it was around the same time. And when I first started doing the Hollywood rounds, I was introduced as the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire person. And that was often that's why I got a meeting, you know. And the first thing they'd say is, "What happened?" But I mean, I worked writing television. I was writing television comedy, and at the same time writing novels. So I had two computers, you know, serious and not serious. But in the production company where I was doing the comedy, we also did game shows, and there were two other people that I'd worked with in radio, where we'd come up with radio formats. And we came up with a few TV formats that worked, and they did okay. And then we thought this was just another one of them, but it went mad.
Knowing now that you used to write stand-up for other people's acts, and now Immortal Man's about to come out, you're writing Bond. You know, how has your approach to writing changed?
I don't know if it's changed. I now admit what my approach to writing is, because I used to pretend that I planned things and had a strategy and you know, would do a treatment and say, this is what I'm planning to do. But the truth is, I tried now, I'm completely open about it. I don't plan it really. And I will do a treatment, but with the proviso that it might not be like this. Because for me, the way to write is just to start and just go. Know where you're sort of heading and know probably who the characters are, but even then you don't know that. And just see what happens. And the line that seems good will suddenly take you in a certain direction. And what I like to do is discover stuff in the writing. So find out, even about character, but sometimes even plot from things the best example I can give is Eastern Promises, where the lead character is apparently working for the Russian mafia, and it turns out, this is a spoiler, but it turns out he's an undercover policeman. I was writing a scene where he has a meeting with a policeman and wrote some lines, and the line suggested that he was a policeman, that he was undercover. And I thought, oh my God, that would be amazing, because I didn't know. And this was 2/3 of the way through the film.
And you didn't know?
No, I didn't. Before that, I didn't know. And then as I'm writing this scene with this, I don't know, something happened. I reversed the lines or something. And I thought, oh, no, he's the policeman. And he's telling his subordinate what to do. And I thought, that's amazing. But then I thought, okay, I'm going to have to reverse engineer this. Then I thought, do it as little as possible. Because then, if I didn't know,
right,
the audience won't know.
So you have to go back and now reverse engineer the script.
Yeah, but sometimes it's more catastrophic than that, where you do something in the scene that you think, oh my God, that's what's going on. And then you have to properly reverse engineer. With that, I'd left it alone as much as I could. But sometimes you think, okay, I'm going to have to go back. But give authority to the most recent thing is what I try to do.
That is fat, because when I was watching Eastern Promises, I was like, this feels like a Kaiser Soze-esque like flip on like the entire perspective of the entire narrative.
It was.
Yeah,
because I didn't know.
That's amazing. I mean, I know that Vince Gilligan famously for Breaking Bad, they'd write themselves into corners.
That's exactly what I did. I didn't know they did that. Yeah, that's exactly what I did.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's got to be so much fun. It's so kinetic. It's got to be in the room.
It's only for me. It's only fun if that's the way I'm doing it. If I'm saying, okay, this is Act 1, this is Act 2, this is Act 3. This happens, that's the relationship, then that happens, then it ends like that. He's just like...
Yeah. You follow the road until it splits, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, has it been honed in you at this point where you know, like is there a feeling that you get that you associate with that level of intuition?
I don't know what it is. It's most like dreaming for me.
It's like dreaming.
Yeah, where... everybody dreams and you wake up. And the thing is with everybody's dreams is characters who your brother, your friend, whatever, will appear in the dream. And their dialogue would be perfect. I mean, the plot's all over the place in a dream. God knows what's going on. But the characters are dead right. Your friend doesn't walk into your dream with a line of exposition. Do you know what I mean? They're real. They are themselves. So some part of your brain is able to process your friend or your brother or your sister and give them dialogue that is absolutely the way they would speak. And if I can, I try and switch it all off and try and get to that where you're just letting it go.
Yeah. I mean, it's you're connecting to that
something,
part of your brain.
Whatever it is, yeah. Because I think for me anyway, if I use my rational brain, it becomes very irrational. And I don't think reality necessarily is rational or logical. It never is, and people don't behave the same way one day to the next. And if you can try and throw a bit of that, I mean, you have got to obey the rules of fiction, otherwise everybody just freaks out. But
it's got to be grounded somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in Peaky Blinders, for example, I mean, there's a lot of magic, almost like they have some characters have this connection to the other world.
Yeah.
That. It feels like, I mean, other than the fact that they're gypsy, I come from gypsy stock.
Wow.
Yeah. A big part of my family was from Romania pre-World War II.
Wow.
So like a lot of, so that whole part of their background, like I connected with in a way that I haven't seen in other films and TV.
Yeah.
But like, it's like, it just is that's part of their background. You don't have to explain it.
Exactly. I mean, it's so my dad, and my mom as well, I found out later, but were connected to that world. And it was just like a normal thing that certain things that were, my mum would look at, my dad would bring stuff back and said, no, you don't bring that in the house. You know, and it just know it. But what it helps with the way I write is to have that which gets you out of certain logic problems.
Yeah, because if you're too in the logic land, then it feels too rigid. Like it's
Yeah.
Well, for me, like I was doing stand up for a while. It wasn't my medium, so I started doing solo performance. I was like, I need something longer.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this feels right for the way that my brain works.
Yeah.
Would you say series or film is more tied? It is more closer to how your brain works.
I enjoy doing both. It feels that a series, a long form television, because you've got so much screen time, it's more like writing a novel. And you've got a lot more freedom with the characters. You can keep them unsympathetic for longer. You can delay things in terms of the redemption of the character or the reveal longer, obviously. With the film, you've got your 90 minutes or 2 hours, you've got to do 3 acts, you've got to focus on one thing, one element. Like in the film, it's on Tommy Shelby. And you've got to pay everything off. You don't have the luxury of going, I'm going to leave a cliffhanger and look really clever and then I'll worry about it next time, you know, which is always a luxury. But with the film, you've got to actually sort of know where you're going, really.
Yeah, you got to stick the landing in the due amount of
exactly.
time. You've had such a prolific career. When I told someone, a friend of mine, that I was interviewing you, he was like, you have to ask him how many clones of him there are, because there are so many of all the ideas that you have. Like, I guess, or the ideas that you actually come to fruition.
Yeah.
How many? Like, what percentage of that is the amount of ideas that you are rifling through at any given time?
I tend to. It's a funny way of doing stuff, but because I write in the way that I write, it's quite fast. And what I tend to do is I'll put aside a week or two, usually 2 weeks or something, where it's just that. And it will be absolute concentration on that, to the point where, you know, sometimes I'll wake up in the morning and have a shower twice and think, I've just done this. Because I'm thinking. And driving can be quite hazardous as well, because it's just you're so much into it. And so it's sort of right in there. And then when you stop that, I do find it, I sort of want to touch wood, but I find it okay to then turn that one off and go on to the next one. And that one comes as well from the same place. And just let them go. And it is a lot of different stuff, but it's sort of what I would do anyway. I think I'd do it anyway, because it's just something that I want to do. But in terms of like, is there a queue, like an airport of ideas going around? Not really, no. A lot of the stuff is commissioned, you know. A lot of stuff is people saying, do you want to write this? And if I like the sound of it, I'll do it. Original ideas, I do want to spend more time doing original stuff, because I have got a lot of thoughts about, you know, what would work. But things tend to come in terms of a scene, really, or a set of some dialogue that I think you can imagine where that's going to go. You know, you can imagine how that would develop, and then if you get some time, you can just start writing it and see what happens. But there's no luxury of blind alleys, really. You can't just sit there and go, "I'll give this a go," and then see what happens. You sort of got to be sure that you're on the right track. So not on the right track, that this one will go. You know.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of the times it's just you just got to jump in.
Always. The only way to do it is to just start, for me anyway, is just to start doing it. And that's when it becomes fun. At first you can think, you know, I don't want to get into this. But as soon as you start, and I think the way to do it is make it always, you can only do it if you're doing it in a way that is, what I tell myself sometimes is this isn't really me doing this. I'm just playing now. I'm just messing about. Just pretending that this is what it is. And sometimes just introducing a random thing into it, a random idea. I saw somebody once, many years ago, called Edward de Bono, who was a philosopher. And he did a talk, and I went to see him, and he was talking about creativity, and he said, if you're on a journey from your house to somewhere you've never been, it gets more and more difficult, because it's less and less familiar. If you're on a journey from somewhere strange to home, it gets easier and easier. And he said, so what you should do if you're being creative is, okay, you're writing something set in New York in the 1840s, let's say. Think about something, a cabbage, random. Think of a random word, cabbage. So you start with cabbage. I've got to get from cabbage to New York, or to your story of New York in the 1840s. How do you do that? And so I don't know how that works. So let's say you start off with an image of somebody chopping a cabbage, or picking a cabbage, or cooking a cabbage. And you've got to get from that image to where you've got to get to. And usually you go on this weird, odd journey that gets you back there to where you started with your two characters who had just fallen in love, or your two characters who are getting married that morning. But you started with a cabbage. And that thing just makes it different.
So you know where home is.
Yeah.
You're just throwing the boomerang out.
You're getting out there somewhere wild and distant. And cabbage is a bad example. Think of something really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, something like a house on fire. Let's say, you know, you start with that, and so you start with the burning house, and you've got to get back from there to where you know you've got to get to, which is, you know, let's say this episode or this movie is about a couple who are going to get married that morning, and that journey can make you look really clever.
Once, I nearly got fucking everything.